the 1st of November 2019, Holbrook Landcare celebrated our 30th year of sharing knowledge and experience, of achieving positive outcomes for the environment and agricultural production systems, and importantly, of social resilience in our local region. To mark the occasion, a 30-year forum was held in Holbrook to celebrate some of the fantastic achievements of our members and showcase why Landcare has been so enthusiastically embraced by our community, and explore the role that Landcare might play in the sustainability of our region into the future. Without the support of the community, our partners and stakeholders who have engaged with us along this journey, our success and achievements would not have been possible. So from the staff and board of Holbrook Landcare Network, a sincere thank you to everyone.
So thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate that that it's been a bit of a travel for some, and we've got a few apologies. We've got, as what happens in Landcare, with people going mad on shifting hay and chasing fires and all sorts of things. So, anyway, we'll get going, and people can join us as they come along. So thank you very much for joining us for our 30 years of Landcare in Holbrook celebration. My name's Dale Stringer, and I'm the Executive Officer of Holbrook Landcare, and I'll be doing the emceeing for today. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So today I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional country of the Wiradjuri people, and we'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to their elders past, present and future. A warm welcome to all our members and former members and friends. As I said, I understand it's a very busy time, and appreciate you getting here. Also like to welcome our partners and guests, and particularly we have today the Honourable Susan Lee, Federal Member for Farrer, and the Minister for the Environment. Thanks, Susan, for coming. We have Gary Rodder from Murray Local Land Services. We have Heather Wilton, Mayor of Greater Hume Council, and Steve Pinnock. Thanks very much for coming along. Steph Cameron from Landcare New South Wales. Steph's the Chair of Landcare New South Wales. And Shane Norris as well, CEO of Landcare Australia. So we appreciate everyone making the effort to come down. I'd just quickly like to ask the board to stand up, those who have managed to get here, just so that people know who you are. So we have Angela Avery, we have Tony Knott, we have Helen Burns, and Sarah Trescothick, our fearless leader. And that's all we have at the moment, but we have a few others who might be joining us later on. So Dougal Frederickson, apology, Sandy Middleton, Hamish Patton, Peter Richardson, Dougal McKay and Colin Geddes, who are all madly, I think most of them are madly up baling up hay or fleece at the moment. So, but anyway, hopefully they'll join us later on. And just quickly to point out the staff, if you've got any questions through the day, or if you're floating around and haven't met our staff, we have Paula Sheehan up the back, who's the Regional Landcare Facilitator, Rita Bowler, who's our Administration Officer, Phoebe Gulliver, who's a Project Officer and also Local Landcare Coordinator, and Kylie Durant, who's our Project Manager for all things NRM. Just quickly, the housekeeping. So the toilets, if you go out this double door and go around, the toilets are around the corner. Tea and coffee will be available through the afternoon, and yeah. So, and also there's some of our information and presentations around the place for you to have a look at on the way through. Anyone who's coming up, just be careful of this cord, please, and don't trip over. The rest of it, I think, take care of itself. So look, just briefly, I suppose, Holbrook Landcare, we're celebrating 30 years of Landcare in Holbrook. It's had a few name changes, and I suppose to get an understanding of what that all means, I'm going to go back very briefly a bit further than that with, I suppose, what I see. There's a lot of definitions of what is Landcare, but I think a couple of fundamentals are that Landcare is a collective action by local communities around natural resource management and or ag. It brings people together to achieve a common goal or address common problems. And it's grounded in the belief that we can do more together than you can individually. So I think with that sort of ethos in mind, we find that that's lived in Holbrook for a lot longer than the 30 years where we're acknowledging the Landcare label. So I think it's fair to say that there's a really long history of community action in Holbrook, and through, like most community action, that's been driven around common issues. Initially coming together in the 40s around soil con and erosion issues, and then moving through a phase where there was groups, Hadrag and Hadras, who come together around farming issues and explored production through workshops and demonstrations and trials. So that was through the 60s and 70s, and then towards through the 80s, I suppose, dieback and native vegetation disappearing was a big catalyst for what became Trees on Farms, and then in '89, Trees on Farms Landcare. So that's sort of the journey in a nutshell to where Landcare came from. And then from there, that was a formation of separate sub-catchment groups who all came together to form that Landcare, as well as some of the other pre-existing groups in the area. Through the 90s and early 2000s, Holbrook Landcare really emerged as I suppose, a large player in terms of Landcare. They were driven by a really passionate community, and really emerged as a big player, not just locally for their own projects, but also regionally. And in the and that, you know, when you look back through the history, you can see that in the activity that happened in that late 90s and early 2000s. And then in the mid 2000s, there was with a change in the sort of operating structure, there was a bit of a rethink or a reframing of Landcare, and in 2008 we became Holbrook Landcare Network, and that was as a result of some smaller groups in the area experiencing a bit of burnout or just having a change in the way they were set up, and Holbrook, I suppose, emerging to be that central point of contact. And so what are we now? I think one of the hard things to explain at the moment is that when people say, where do you operate? Sorry, this mic stand's fallen down on me, so I'm just going to take it off there. We don't have a fixed boundary. Traditionally, Holbrook Landcare had a well-defined catchment boundary, and what we've found over the time is that that's become very porous. So as groups around us, as we partner with groups around us, or as some of those groups have came into the fold, our boundaries become quite porous. But I suppose it's represented by the high rainfall mixed farming area around the southwest slopes. We have over 400 paid-up members. We're a not-for-profit company with deductible gift recipient status. We have an elected board, currently 10, and an AGM coming up in December for all those who are keen to put their hand up and get involved. We have 5 staff at the moment, and I suppose a bit of a point of pride for us at the moment is that last year we purchased an office. We were renting, and Holbrook's not flush with renting options, so we invested some of the funds from the years into our own office, and we're pretty proud of that at the moment. And this last year we had 25 projects from 12 different funders. So we have a pretty diverse base. We have a go at everything from large-scale biodiversity offsets and revegetation projects to some smaller membership services such as soil testing and weather stations. We run drought preparedness workshops, acid soil management projects, and through to habitat management for pygmy perch. So a really broad spectrum of projects. And I think, and some of those are self-funded through generation of funds from our members and donations, and then a lot is underpinned by grants and projects through government and philanthropic sources, and some fees for service. So, and I suppose just I quickly wanted to have a look at why I think in 30 years why Holbrook Landcare still is going strong, and I feel like it's got plenty, another good 30 years in front of us. I think that I come down to 4 keys to success. One was the strength of the networks and the relationships. I think internally, the relationships and the network of the community of Holbrook is fairly incredible, and despite the fact that there's plenty of varied backgrounds and approaches and philosophies, we all seem to come together pretty well. I think at an organisational level, I think there's been a realisation all along pretty much that you can't be all things to all people, so there's been a real effort through the time to partner with the right people, so being very open to partnerships, and that the strength in numbers, so there's not much point us being competitive with groups around us. We're better off trying to find those collaborative approaches, and so we're pretty proud that we have partnerships with all three tiers of government, industry, other Landcare groups and farming systems groups, and some private sector people who are aligned with our values and share our goals. So I think this was a controversial slide because I haven't got everybody, so please, if your face isn't on it, please don't take that personally. But I think leadership is another thing that I picked up really strongly looking back across 30 years of Holbrook Landcare, is that they've been blessed by hard-working, passionate and committed and connected and skilled people who have been prepared to put their hand up on the board and the committee. And in the 5 years I've been here, it's certainly it blows me away at the level that board operates in terms of thinking, and I think from my involvement back a fair while, that's just been a hallmark of Holbrook Landcare. I think capacity is another big one. I think identifying the value of coordinators and people to get things done in between meetings and when the volunteers can't do it has been a realisation fairly early, and Holbrook has a really good, I suppose have embraced that. We've had more than 30 permanent part-time staff over the time, more than 20 casuals and countless contractors, so I think that was a really smart move to invest in that capacity. It means when some of the other groups are suffering burnout and turning over, I think it empowers a volunteer committee to keep going, and really, things keep happening all the time. So, and lastly, relevance to members. So, in a membership-based organisation, if you're not relevant and you're not delivering things that are hitting the mark, you disappear pretty quick. So I think that trying to understand the needs and issues and respond to that is a really important part of why Holbrook Landcare has been successful. And if we slip on that, you find out about it pretty quick. So that's the other beauty of a members-based organisation in a place like Holbrook, is you find out if you're going off track. So and then you take that on board and you adjust. So with going back through and having a look at the activity over the past, over that 30 years, there's been more than 1,000 events involving over 25,000 people days coming and being involved. So they're huge. That's huge numbers for me, and that just continues to, that's strong right throughout. And so just to finish, I suppose the one last point that I'd like to make before I hand over to some people who are going to talk about different values of Landcare is a value of Landcare. And I've gone the easy way, well, it's not really the easy way, but the clean cut way, and talk about the value of Holbrook Landcare in dollar terms. We're going to hear from some people about what it's meant to them to be involved and what we've achieved from an environmental perspective. But from dollar terms, Holbrook Landcare have attracted $17 million in through the door in cash over that 30-year period. That's all gone into the local community and the local area. And that's a combination of a whole heap of things, from grants and donations to memberships and everything, which blew me away a bit when you sit down and do those sums. All of that funding is matched, and if you go back through the books, most of the on-ground action is matched well and truly more than 1 for 1. So conservatively, just directly inputted into Landcare works in Holbrook, I reckon it'd be fair to call it $35 million in investment in the activities by, and that includes that 17, but that's by partners and by the Landcares themselves, which is massive. And just finally, there was some work done by Oricon, a company named Oricon that was contracted by Landcare New South Wales to try and get some value, some estimates of value of Landcare, and they come up with a return on investment of about 6 to 1. So what they looked at was the economic benefits, so the higher productivity, improved land, the social benefits about enhancing the resilience and wellbeing of communities, and the environmental benefits of protecting and repairing the natural environment and the value that the community places on that. It's a really hard job, but when they looked at that and conservatively apportioned what they think Landcare contributes to that bigger pie, they come up with that 6-1. So I've said for Holbrook here, that would be in the order of over $100 million worth of value into the community over that 30-year period in all those things. So now they're only numbers, and it's not all about the dollars, but that's just one way that I think, even with a grain of salt, you'd have to acknowledge that Holbrook Landcare's had a massive imprint on the district. And that'll do me. So I'd just like to call Susan up to have a few words, if I could, please. Yeah, you'll have to hold the mic, I'm sorry.
Oh, I've got this sneaky little... Do I need the mic as well, Phoebe? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale, and it's a real pleasure to be here as your local member and obviously also as the Minister for the Environment. But when the Prime Minister called me and asked me to be the Minister for the Environment, he said, Susan, it really worries me that 40% of our school kids do not know where their food and fibre comes from. And one thing I would like you to do is to spread the knowledge of what farmers and agriculture do for the wider economy and our way of life. And there's no better place where those come together than the Landcare movement. And Landcare is funded principally from the environment portfolio, not so much the ag portfolio, although they both share in what we call our NLP funding overall, which is the National Landcare Program. And those of you that work in it will know that it's sometimes quite complicated, that it's changed from grants to organisations to procurement from government, saying we want these outcomes, who can deliver them. And that, by the way, is why Holbrook Landcare has been so successful, because it has been able to step up and say, yes, I can do these things. And that's made a big difference. But as Minister, 18 months into this particular funding round, I'm interested in how we might, number one, secure a really, really strong future for Landcare, and two, make it sufficiently diverse on the ground so that whatever type of farming activity and whatever your members want, you can achieve through your local Landcare group. Because sometimes if you say these words to farmers, and I was a farmer for 17 years and I know that these terms, can sometimes make farmers a bit anxious. We're here as your Landcare local organisation to work on threatened species, biodiversity offsets, climate change adaptation. Not that farmers don't agree that those things are important, but the question is, well, what are you asking of me, and how does this work for my farming enterprise, and how is it worth me participating in? Because if the outcomes are for the public good, which they are, farmers manage over 60% of Australia's landmass, so we can't care about the environment without having farmers actually on the tools every day doing a lot of what needs to be done, then it's quite right that taxpayers should participate in the social good, as the terminology is, that says we want our farmers to be successful, we want them, number one, to be there for the long term, to be able to participate the way they want to. In no way should government ever be doing things to farmers, but with them, engaging them, and they're incredibly smart people. Anyone who's survived the millennium drought and is going through this particular rough patch, I always find, is extremely good at what they do. So for Holbrook Landcare, Dale, you've articulated the successes and the engagement, and the relevance that you mentioned right there is exactly where I think the key to your success is. Over the years, you've had fantastic coordinators, Phoebe and Kylie. I've met them on the job, I've been out with them, And you've had farmers that have stepped up and they've been leaders. They've shown the way. They've shown other farmers that this is a good movement, this makes sense, and let's all get behind it, and it can deliver for us. So my main message is incredibly well done. I have enormous respect for this Landcare group. I always have. Once upon a time I was secretary of my local Landcare group, and it was always a bit of a battle in those early days. You've always been the gold standard because you've done it so well. So your leadership has been inspiring. Your prospects for the future are incredibly good, but I want to help make sure they're the best they can be, and maybe I'm in a position to do that. And all the very best for the future. And because I didn't mention at the beginning, a big shout out to your Mayor, Heather Wilton, who also has a background in farming, and I think it helps when you have people in government who actually understand agriculture. But we really, really do learn an awful lot from you. Thank you.
To introduce myself, I'm Mandy Locke. I was the second Landcare coordinator in Holbrook, and I arrived in May of 1992. I was newly married and very new to the district. My father-in-law had seen the advertisement in the paper while I was on my honeymoon and presented it to me on my day of arrival. I'm not quite sure what that meant. I was thrilled with the opportunity. I'd always been really interested in the Landcare movement and had looked at what Potter Plan and things were doing down in Victoria, and I just thought it was a really exciting time in agriculture. Oh my goodness, the flies are I was working job sharing at the time with Leanne Wheaton, which was really great. She knew the district and was a great support to me being new. It was a wonderful opportunity to meet a lot of people in the district and to be involved in agriculture. There weren't a lot of opportunities at the time. I had an agricultural degree and I wasn't too sure what I was going to do when I came to Holbrook. So that was wonderful. At that period, we were doing a lot of work with tree planting, with tree seeding programs, with erosion work. Farm plans were a big focus, so we ran a lot of workshops in the district doing farm planning. We were doing seed collections of local seed varieties with some overseas students and various ones. There was a LEAP program with young unemployed youth, and that was a bulk of the kind of stuff that we were involved in. I was with Landcare for about 20 months until the arrival of our first child, and it was a truly wonderful time. I think I finally thought I had made my name when somebody approached my father-in-law and said, "So you're Mandy Locke's father-in-law," rather than me always being the new person in the district. I thought that was it. Aside from that, will I tell my re-story?
Sure, that's a great story.
I did have one, towards the end of my time with Landcare, I had one very memorable morning with the Buells. I worked a lot with Rhys Buell and enjoyed his company and his passion immensely. He was entering for a state award and had asked me to come out and take some photos of all the work we'd done around the farm. Which I happily did, and we did a big drive around and he showed me how everything was developing, which was wonderful. We had morning tea and then he said, "I think we should go and take some aerial shots." So I said, right. Unbeknownst to him, I was about 10 weeks pregnant, so I was suffering a little bit with morning sickness. He pulled the plane from the hangar and then went to start it and there was a flat battery. So little nervously, I watched him jump start it from the Toyota and we then duly took off, flew all up around the Upper Murray, had a wonderful morning. I was then taking aerial shots, feeling more and more unwell. He landed and I said a very swift goodbye and jumped in my car and headed off back to town, feeling very green, but with some great shots. And he won that award that year, I believe. So that was a great morning. But yeah, I was very lucky to work with a wonderful committee who were very supportive of all the things that we were doing at the time. And I made some really great friends through my time with Landcare. So yes, it was a very positive experience for me.
And is it a still positive experience being on the farm?
Oh, always. We're very, very, very lucky to be involved out here. Philip and I, but I would say mostly Philip, has done a lot of Landcare remedial work, fencing out creeks, very involved in wildlife corridor plantings. Our bird life is sensational. and we take a lot of joy walking down our creeks and just looking at how everything's developing. The pastures are really well sown. Yeah, it's a joy. It's a beautiful place to be and a great place for us to see our sons show enthusiasm into the future with agriculture and with Landcare works. Yes.
Well, hello everybody. I'm just not sure why I've got two microphones.
That one's for the recording.
Oh, right, got it. First of all, I'd like to, you've got to have a joke. Someone's got to tell a joke, I reckon. So I've been trying to think of a joke just while I've been sitting there about something relevant to Holbrook Landcare, and what I've come up with is working as a team and no one leaving things undone, and everybody backing up the other person. So there was Paddy and Mick and a fella sitting in a car, and Paddy and Mick were going up and down one side of a street, and the nature strip, and Paddy was digging a hole and Mick would fill it in. And then they'd walk forward about 3 feet or so, and Paddy would dig another hole and Mick would fill it in. And this bloke sitting in his car, he was waiting for an appointment that hadn't turned up. And he's watching what's going on, he couldn't figure it out. And they worked like troopers. They went up one side of the street and they came back down the other side of the street. Got the better of him, he went over to these blokes and he said, for the love of Mike, I can't understand what you two, sorry about my Irish accent, what you two fellas are doing. And they said, oh, I can see the confusion. Well, Mick digs the hole, I fill it in, but Patrick, who's normally the tree planter, is not here today. So that was a fairly weak connection to Landcare, but at least it was a joke. Briefly, what happened as far as I'm concerned with Landcare about whatever it was, 30 years ago. Obviously it was 30 years ago. Kim and myself, we had just started J Field's Nursery. It was in its very early days, and we read about a fellow as an article in the paper, and his name was Gus Sharp, and he started an organisation called Trees on Farms. And so we contacted Gus, he came down, had a yak to us what that was all about, and he was actually using the words Landcare in those days. It was unheard of, I think, pretty well in that year. So we thought, well, what can we do with it? So we contacted Hadrag, who arguably, to Hadrag's credit, they were in fact the Landcare group, and they'd been going for quite a long time, well before Holbrook Landcare group started. And but officially they weren't called a Landcare group. And so I think Sam McCulloch was the president, I think, or something like that at the time. So Sam organised a get-together with Hadrag, a meeting, and to that meeting, which was in the RS Club, we put it to the group, do you want to start a Trees on Farms group? Everybody unanimously said yes. So that was the start of Holbrook Trees on Farms group. And then we needed a president, and Pete Truskothic was the man that stepped up to the plate, and he was fantastic. I've got to tell you, he drove me bloody nuts. He wouldn't stop ringing me. 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, oh no, I just got an idea about saying, oh, Christ's sake. No, but Pete, you were really good. You didn't leave a stone unturned, and well, Dale's covered most of the history from then on. We had a battle with our autonomy for a while, and but we overcame that with determination, and we dug our heels in, and I wouldn't say won the battle, but we got to where we always were heading, I think. My roles along the way was a mix of everything, President, Secretary, Treasurer, Public Officer, but I must say the Treasury bit, Kim would just do all the figures for me and I'd just read them out. So I can't take credit for that. So I better change a few photos. So what we got here is, for Kim and I, we saw a landscape that needed trees, basically, and that's the average paddock about those times. So there was an interest and a push for looking after our native vegetation and enhancing it and developing it. So back in those days, a lot of people would look at that and say, bloody bush, messy stuff, be better if it was growing grass. But I remember my father, when I bought Jayfields, he said to me, we had about 500 acres of bush. He said, when are you going to clear it? I said, Dad, one day that will be gold, trust me. And probably is. So along the way we started taking interest in the group I'm talking about, locking up parts of our farms, and that's just an example. I don't know if you can make out the Lamandra coming up underneath there. Prior to that being locked up, it was just all bared off with sheep camps and so on. Gullies fenced out, mopping up eroded banks and stabilising structure. Things we learn about, we used to think a dead tree needed to be pulled out and burnt and dealt with and cleaned up, but along the way we learnt that things like that are really important for some species of birds, where they perch and all sorts of things. Again, all these bits and pieces that in the past a landholder might think is messy, they're really important things, but you all know that. So these are the sorts of things that developed along the way: tree plantings, wetlands for waterfowl and filtering nutrient. That's up the road, not far up the highway. That was a bit of salting. That's the same place. I won't mention the place, but you all know where it is. Forestry was part of the activities that we got involved with. Putting something that was more suitable on the landscape than pasture. And there's some early days of some school kids getting involved in Landcare, planting trees. We had seed orchards, CSIRO. This was a seed orchard of ironbark that were resistant to Christmas beetles. So there's some of the activities. That was spotted gum, an improved seed orchard of spotted gum. So for farm forestry, we were growing things that had some genetic selection and superior growth and timber qualities. Silky oak, high valued timber grown in amongst pasture, and that particular plantation, I've just got to tell you a quick story about that, if I have time. That was incredibly lucky and fortuitous. There was there's silky oaks on the outside. They were intended to be for timber in the first part of the planting, but then there was a plantation project up in northern New South Wales that were chasing genetically selected silky oak, and by chance, when this was planted, each of those, where those silky oaks are, 3 silky oaks were planted from a random mix of 6 different provinces or areas where those silky oak came from. And then they were selected for the best. So in fact, that became a seed orchard. It was genetically selected. And so the company said they tracked this down through various channels, and they said to the person that owns these trees, "What do you want for the seed?" And the owner said, 2 cents. And he said, how many seeds would you have? And so a quick calculation came up with 1.3 million. So there was $26,000 that was had by that seed orchard, which was outstanding. And that happened for about 3 years in a row. So that's the changed landscape that happened, you know, over numbers of years on lots of properties around the district, and it really got people thinking and involved and cranked up about so many things. You know, I remember the early days when I came here in 1983. You'd talk to the average farmer about birds, and you know, what are they, sort of thing. I'm exaggerating, of course, but you know, throughout the life of Holbrook Landcare, all those things, structure, the types of vegetation, the ground cover, the overstory, the wetlands, and you know, soil nutrient, birds, habitat, it all evolved and became very much in the forefront of people's minds. Again, a changed landscape, and again and again. You might recognise the similarity there. There we go. And so, just touching on what it really meant in a big way for Kim and I. We started a nursery. It started the first year we grew 3,500 trees. The second year 20,000, and we had to buy in 10,000, and then it just took off after that. We employed a lot of people locally. I think in the heady times when we weren't so automated, we were employing about 35 people at any one time, and so it grew into a bloody monster. And luckily, a wood duck came along and took it over. So we were growing about 4.5 million seedlings a year in the end, and they were getting trucked all over the east coast of Australia. A lot of those were forestry, of course, but I think we got up to about 1.2 or 4 million re-veg plants. That's why my elbows are bent, and I've just had an operation on my elbow. All those years of planting trees with a potty pukki, and a bit more than nursery. That's the staff. I think that was an award year. We won an award for the best nursery in the state, and then the best nursery in the country. That's the type of product that we hit the market with. Well, that's what it evolved into, the high-code tray. Very efficient and very effective. That's my wife, Kim. And I think that's it. So, as far as the photos go, what else can I tell you? The people that were involved, as I said, Pete was our first president. You know, Roger Geddes, who's sadly no longer with us, he played a big role. Andrew Hicks, I'm going to forget a lot of people's names, no doubt, but it was a big effort by a lot of people. And one thing I clearly remember was the unity that the Holbrook catchment, which was basically our boundaries in the early days, the unity that we had. And I know when we tried to step outside that boundary a little bit, or even what was within our catchment, particularly, well, I won't mention the direction, but a direction, it was really hard to get them involved in the group. And one of the best things that we did was start these sub-catchment groups. And I think that might have been Pete's idea from memory, and that was really worthwhile. That was a pivotal point, I believe. And there's something about Holbrook. I'm not just saying this. It's a fact. There's something about the Holbrook area and the people that are in Holbrook that they are very innovative, they are very adaptive, and they've always been willing to take on a challenge head on and use the best science. And what I'd like to finish by saying the success of Holbrook Landcare is because of the people, and that winds me up.
Thanks, Dale, and thank you to the Holbrook Landcare Group. I find it a privilege to be invited to come along and speak about some of my reflections on the group, and hopefully the continuation of the progress that Holbrook's had over 30 years will continue over the next 30 years. I'm sorry I haven't got a joke for you. You wouldn't want to hear my jokes, they don't come out very well, and Sky hasn't written one for me, so I'm going to leave it. But I want you all to stand up, please. Everyone, no one to miss out. Rightio, we're turning right and we're walking into Doctor Who's time box. We're going back 30 years. So you can all sit down now, you're 30 years back. Yeah, we all look a lot younger, happier, fresher, and diligent with what we want to do. So we're boarding a Fokker Friendship. And I'm your captain, co-pilot, and commentator. So I want to keep the plane in the air, Qantas, so I don't want any interjections. So now you've got to close your eyes solidly, no peeping, and look back to 30 years ago. Right, we're in the air. We're taking off from the Holbrook Airport and we're circling around the Fokker Friendship. And we can see below us degraded land. The hilltops are quite bare, most of them, except for the forestry country. Sheep camps, cattle camps are on top of the hills, nothing but cape weed growing, invasive weeds. And in the summertime, this acts as a great recharge because there's a lack of vegetation. Mid-slopes, the seepages, starting of salinity happening. Some of the creeks showing signs of salinity. Erosion, our little dry creeks, gullies are showing that time's up. They're having a hard time. And lack of trees. The Holbrook Trees on Farm group is going by now. And it was started because farmers had an empathy for growing trees and wanted to improve their landscape. Whether it was cosmetic or what, they weren't too sure. But we then showed them that trees could be beneficial in so many ways. So looking at some of the farming country, traditionally tilled, and topsoil loss in the droughts. 83 was quite a severe drought here. A lot of topsoil was blown away, and some of the practices weren't so good. Keeping ground cover during those times was difficult, and no one sort of was given much advice on how to do it. So anyway, we're back on the ground. You can open your eyes and we're back today, here and 30 years later. Well, Holbrook Landcare Group grew out of Holbrook Trees on Farms because the funding had become available through the Landcare movement. And there was great competition between us and West Hume for gaining funds and receiving or getting funds, particularly for a coordinator. And we were fortunate to employ a fellow called Colin O'Keefe, and I know those on the committee, it was a tough time. We had to, a lot of meetings in Wagga, Department of Ag, trying to work out the logistics of hiring someone and giving them duties and how we'd manage it and why we should have the funds to do. We were starting into the phase of some work. We'd had the idea of Holbrook being an umbrella group for a number of sub-catchments because Holbrook's such a diverse area. It lent itself to having sub-catchments controlling and people controlling their own areas and destinies where they want to go rather than a blanket policy covering the whole district. And that worked pretty well. Sawyers Creek, we had to push and prod, but they were the first project we had out at Kenny Holmes where they had a great eroded plough furrow which drained a bit of water into the Billabong Creek, but it was 20 feet deep and 20 feet wide. And the first project was to put a flume in there, a great concrete structure, and I think it's still going, isn't it, Ken? Good. 30. Yeah. Yeah, so Holbrook began its way. A lot of the things we addressed were probably planting of trees, obviously, re-fencing gullies, creeks to keep livestock out, put ground cover there to filtrate the nutrients going to the streams and causing nutrient transfer and turbidity. We progressed into sort of an education phase, having field days where we raised the topic of acid soils and put it on the profile, and a group, the Community Acid Soils Group, arose in the area and became quite a force, getting funding to help establish perennial pastures with the use of lime, as we had such a serious pH issue. And for the first time, that project actually measured deep soil acidity on farms. You had to take a surface and a subsurface test. It was all mapped, and hopefully those results are around somewhere, hidden. But it'd be interesting to review them in another 10, 20 years, see how our soil health's improved. Tree corridors everywhere, as Noel's shown you with the photos. We all had to go treeing, and I think there's some issues that have arisen out of some of our tree corridors. We all have wombats, kangaroos, foxes, and that's probably something on the agenda, but definitely trees have helped our bird life, and that was the aim, rebirding of Holbrook Landcare area, where a great amount of money came into the area to grow an enormous amount of trees to change the landscape. And from having very few trees on farms, particularly I know my farm, we had some paddock trees, but they're nearly all gone now, and I suppose for every tree that's lost, there's probably 10,000 have been planted in some different way, whether it's a fenced off creek or gully, or just a corridor for a windbreak and shade. So Holbrook Landcare Group's come a long way, and I congratulate it on sort of going to the next step of being a network, coordinating the activities of a whole region now. And some people, been very keen people behind the group, and I must say the staff employed by the group are very diligent and do their utmost for accountability and seeking new projects that are worthwhile for the community and the progression. I have one little issue, I suppose, that to me, one of our aims and goals of the initial Landcare group was written down was to promote the economic of the farmers and encourage environmental sustainability and stop degradation of our natural resources. With that, I think we have a commitment or a diligence to be productive farmers, to feed the world. The issue is going to be more and more severe as the population grows and urban sprawl continues and farms are taken out of production. Only out here we have solar farms now taking out pretty good farming country. So I think there's pressure on those in farming, and hopefully the new generations coming on to be actually look at feeding the world and clothing the world. It's going to be a serious issue and not to be taken lightly. And I think if we just sit back on our laurels and think everything will be all right and not prepared to go with some of the science that's around, the benefits will be missed. Anyway, I haven't got much else to say, but congratulate Holbrook on 30 years, and Dale and his team have done a great job.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Colin Geddes, and I'm apology for this afternoon. I can't make it in there in person. Things are a little bit hectic with shearing and whatnot at the minute, but anyhow, I've been roped in by the guys at Holbrook Landcare for a bit of a video. So I'm a third generation farmer, a second generation Landcare member, and also a current board member. Landcare has been probably a pretty big part of our family, as it has with a lot of other families in the Holbrook district. I can remember as a young fella at school, going out and having tree planting days and whatnot, which were a good reason to get out of the classroom, but also a good way to get out and help with the Landcare projects around Holbrook. I suppose the one of the main things, I suppose, as a younger member of the Holbrook Landcare network is to thank anyone that's had anything to do with Holbrook Landcare over the last 30 years. As a result of the work that those that have gone before us have put in, us as the younger generation of farmers now enjoy the benefits of the work that they've put in. With the plenty of tree lots, retreeing gullies, fencing, all these sorts of projects that we get the benefit of. So thank you. The big benefits that we have, I suppose, from Holbrook Landcare on our property really comes back to those revegetation projects that Holbrook Landcare was very big on in its early days. Revegetating sensitive, vulnerable gullies, hilltops, recharge areas. Certainly achieve some good environmental outcomes. These also flowed through to production benefits of now being able to have stock shelter in paddocks, and not to mention the aesthetics of having a property planted out to nice trees and that type of thing. So thank you to anyone that's gone before us for the hard work, because we now get those benefits. So I've recently joined the Holbrook Landcare board through a bit of persuasion from others in the Landcare organisation. Although a little bit reluctant at first, it's clear to me now, why it's a good thing to have young people involved in the Holbrook Landcare. Without young people coming into Holbrook Landcare, the future won't be nearly as strong as what it's been over the last 30 years. So the going forward, we really need to be able to maintain that natural resource management outcomes that Holbrook Landcare has been able to deliver in the past. We really need to be able to make sure that those services there are available to farmers into the future. And obviously, Holbrook Landcare being so proactive over the last 30 years in doing these projects, we certainly have achieved a lot more than perhaps other organisations have. So there's not as much to do in this area as there would be others, but by no means are we done, and by no means will we probably ever be done. Hence why we need to make sure that Holbrook Landcare is sustainable for another 30 years to come. To provide those services, but also balancing those natural resource management outcomes with production outcomes as well, which the benefits of many farmers in the Holbrook area will certainly be aware of over the work that's been done in the past and into the future, with the likes of the soil testing and multiple different surveys and bits and pieces of research work that Holbrook Landcare's helped be a facilitator of with other organisations and departments. I think all those outcomes are really worth fighting for. So yeah, I guess that's why I decided that I would allow Dale to twist my arm hard enough to join the board. So so I guess just to sum all of that up, one of the main things that I've learnt since becoming a board member is that none of this comes easily. A lot of achieving all these outcomes all cost money. One of the strengths of Holbrook Landcare over the journey, I think, has been the staff. Anyone that's worked in the organisation's been very agile and nimble, and they've all been able to adapt and roll with the punches, so to speak, with funding cycles and that type of thing to keep Holbrook Landcare afloat, and with the work of boards previous to make sure that financially we're stable, and being here for 30 years speaks that they've done a stellar job making sure that that has happened. So into the future, I guess I challenge anyone with the ability to support Holbrook Landcare network in any sense, to do so to their fullest, I suppose, because we've got the runs on the board, I guess, over a sustained period of time, when there'd be plenty of other organisations that haven't been able to achieve what we've achieved for an extended period of time like we have. So so I'll just throw that challenge out there to anyone that has the ability to support Holbrook Landcare, to not just look upon Holbrook Landcare with rose-coloured glasses, but really helping us achieve on-ground outcomes through financial means, or throwing a body in here or there to help out and pitch in. So congratulations Holbrook Landcare on 30 years, well done, and again to everyone that's come before, thank you, and let's go for another 30.
Yeah, it was really torturous getting that out of Colin, so I really hope that you enjoyed it. He told me some really good stories along the way, as well as planting trees. The Geddes family have been stalwarts of Landcare, and all of the boys, as soon as you say, "Oh, was that a superb parrot?" they're all like, and so a great love for birds, and he remembers being nearly put through the windscreen many times on the 4 Mile Lane because of the bronze wings. That was his big memory. So there you go. So thanks for the opportunity here today. Contrary to popular belief, I have not been here for 30 years. I know all us Landcare people look a bit the same sometimes, slightly dishevelled, sort of hanging around the fringes. But I have lived in the district for 20 years almost now, which is pretty scary. And for the first 12 years, I was working up at Tumbarumba with the Catchment Management Authority. But a lot of interaction with the staff and the landholders around Holbrook during that whole time. So 7 years ago, lucky enough to score a permanent job here at Holbrook, which has just been fantastic for me. To be able to be a professional level female person working and living in our town is just such a fantastic thing, and it's pity Susan's gone, but I wanted to say that investment in Landcare is an investment in the economics of the community too. And so although I'm going to talk a lot about the NRM stuff, that's a really important thing that we should remember. And I'm one in a long line of many fantastic people. So the coordinators of the past, of which I'm going to miss some names too, but Catherine Holm you know, Andrew Lawson, and more recently, and of course, Chris Cumming, who really put Holbrook Landcare on the professional track that it is now. And all these people have worked with the board and the community of Holbrook and made us what we are today, and made the landscape, of course. So there are a few things I'll probably skip over a bit because they've been covered, but I mean the main drivers for Holbrook Landcare is obviously it's always about problems. So this tree dieback issue, the salinity. So remember when Peter Herriot's shearing shed was drowning in salt water, and that being a real impetus, to go out and see what the science was out there and what we should be doing about it. And truckloads of money came, which is always a great thing and has had a great impact on Holbrook as well. And erosion's been the other one, which is a constant in our landscape. The degradation of the environment for these things, but also the production impact. Getting access and all that sort of thing has been a huge driver for people to be trying to fix this stuff. And look, funnily enough, I've been doing the same job for about 18 years. I've been called, lots of different things, lots of different funding bodies, lots of different bosses. But, it all comes down to really the same outcome. And that is about putting vegetation back in the landscape. So I was going to try and do some pointer stuff here, but it might be a bit tricky. So, salinity discharge sites, what's the answer? I remember Peter Herriot saying, the millions of engineers coming to the shearing shed to think, how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to solve this problem? And he got sick of it and went off to the Potter farms and went, it's probably about, trees is one of the ways in which we can try and alleviate this problem. Fencing off our creeks and waterways just to stabilise that sediment. And that, it's trees that ended up being most of the solution to a lot of these problems. And at the same time, that's had a huge benefit and a public benefit to our landscape. We've got big landscape scale changes and more veg in our farms and landscapes. And what underpinned being able to do all of that was all the agronomic things that went on as well. So Holbrook's had a long history of in the extension, in pasture management, soils, understanding, fertiliser regimes, all the stuff that allows, once you've, fenced off portions of your land for other things, you've got to increase the productivity on the stuff you've got left. So really this the production stuff underpins being able to do all the natural resource management stuff as well, and so that's been so important. So if we look at, and I'm going to use the old Landcare boundary because that's probably where most of the activity's been, although it's recognised we work across a broader region now, driven by some of the bigger projects we have and the skills we have in our organisation that's useful to other groups. If we look at that being a sort of a base, I suppose, of the vegetation cover, that's a pretty standard map. It doesn't include everything. We won't get too caught up in the details, but that's a sort of, the vegetation infrastructure, I suppose, that we could call a baseline. In terms of the investment, this is what Holbrook Landcare has leveraged in terms of on-ground management over the past 30 years. So I have to go on, I can never remember the number, but it's so about 8,000 hectares of stuff that's gone on in that catchment to do with vegetation. So that might be looking after the stuff that's already there, might be planting new vegetation. And our estimates are about 15% of that was self-funded, so it happened, before all the funding programs, or it's happened because landholders just did it anyway. And thanks to the foresight of some of those Landcare staff who actually went back and had a look and did the mapping and got this information for us. That's not something as a Landcare, we run after projects all the time, and there's new things coming along and new priorities. It's very hard to get that time to reflect, and it's a time like this 30 years that we do. So that that's a huge input into the landscape that Holbrook Landcare and the landholders have been responsible for. If we add to that, we sometimes call them the dark years, but we're trying to get over that now, of all the works that went on with direct input from the CMA at the time, and actually, landholders were so keen to keep doing things, even though the funding wasn't coming through Holbrook Landcare, it was still very important to get that stuff on the ground. So there was a whole lot of other work that's gone on since, which is about another 9,500 hectares across that region. So when we start to look at, this is the scale of landscape change that's really happened, and often Landcare gets criticised for, it's about little tree planting projects and, hasn't got the big picture in view. That sort of view comes over time, and it's only with, the continuity of staff and people in the community that we've been able to tell this story. That's quite huge. So if we remap now what our vegetation assets look like across that region. I'm sorry, I don't think the colour's too well from out there, but this is what it looks like. That's a huge sort of landscape scale change that cumulative investment, working through Holbrook Landcare, through our partners, has achieved. And I think that it's a bit underdone at times. We still, think that we're fiddling around the edges. Well, I'm going to, say that we're not fiddling around the edges anymore. So even, if we go down to a smaller landscape scale, which is easier to see, look at our big, we've got Benambra National Park and Womargama National Park, that's what the sort of green infrastructure or veg infrastructure sort of looks like. With the levels of investment, that's a big change in both the extent of vegetation, which we know is important for a lot of our biodiversity, but the connectivity as well. And so that's a huge achievement. So back in 1718, we were able to work with Murray Local Land Services to do a bit of evaluation. So they wanted to, evaluate across the catchment, can we actually pick up these big changes from space? So really looking at that old satellite imagery and saying, if we got there, has all this worked? What's going on in terms of veg cover? And so we were able to work on, be part of that steering committee and look at the evaluation of all the works. And the first point is, so we get a lot also in Landcare of going, I saw so-and-so's cows in that, that plot and it's wrecked, nothing's happened, it was a waste of money, blah, blah, blah. Well, we've actually been able to pick up now that this is sort of broken up into little sub-catchments, and there is a bit of noise from pine plantations and all that sort of thing, but really looking at the sites out there, they've broken them up into little sub-catchments and said, okay, those sites, we're now be able to pick up from space that we're actually achieving a positive veg cover change. So it hasn't been, there's no waste of money here, we're actually really changing the landscape. And you can see, there was some internal auditing when I was back at the CMA of actually going and eyeballing sites as well. And the conclusion was it was about 8% of sites, go AWOL for whatever reason, and there's lots of reasons why. But in most of those cases, fences are still there. We can go back and do something about that. So that 92% success rate is massive, and I think that's something to be applauded. So that myth that all this money has gone out into the communities and Landcare has been wasted or not used properly is not true at all. And so looking at the change in veg cover across those small catchments, you can see, I'm going to test this. So this the greenest patch here is, that's our Thugger Lane catchments. So that's the area where those first salinity plantings went on in the 90s. And so we can see that, we're building a picture of positive vegetation change. So there was a few messages out of that. So the success rate. So 87% of the sites are absolutely improving. The other thing, what the expectation was that there would be a massive decline in veg cover during the millennium drought, and that that was too much noise, and we probably wouldn't pick up any change. But what we were able to tell from that study is that those planted sites actually have held their own, and we're still in a situation of maintaining and positive increase in the woody veg, and it's related to the investment. So when you overlay, where most of the money went, it correlates with the veg change. And the other bit of news is that those maps, really those areas that were planted back in the 90s, like Thugger Lane and things, are only just, they're really strong on the map. We've got all this vegetation that's been done, between 2004 and up until now that, still doesn't appear at that higher level. So, really we've got some really big increases that are on the cards. What does it look like on the ground? Well, I think we heard a lot from from the Landcare is about, you know, some pretty stark changes. And you'll notice, oh, they were taken at different seasons, but, you know, we've had some stark changes in you know, our pasture systems and farming systems as well, which has allowed, you know, this sort of work to go on. And we don't have a lot of data about that, and that's the next project, Murray Local Land Services, to have a look at, you know, the big push for perenniality in our landscape. Well, you know, we all have an idea in our minds about how far we've moved along that path, but it would be great to try and get some data around that. Oh, I'd love the pictures of Womargama, but really, we're, you know, looking at, you know, large-scale changes of what it looks like. Some people might recognise that. And let's see if this will play. Do you want to see if you can do it, Paula? I mean, just it's some drone footage of just some, you know, fairly modest planting. But if you look at the landscape where all of these areas, you know, these are all planted, all these lines behind. And if you start to look at that landscape, all these little individual trees, you know, they'll slowly die over the next 20 years. And the fact that we've invested in the future infrastructure, the green infrastructure, is going to be incredibly important and something that will really, you know, will stand us apart from a lot of other places. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so yes, it's different, you know, they're not paddock trees, you know, there's linear aspects to it, but that's all about fitting in with the production systems, because like Pete said, you know, we've still got to produce food and do all that. But, you know, won't we be thankful for that in 50 years? So why do we care? You know, we like trees, but, you know, if we go back to why we did in the first place, so we had tree dieback. You know, there was a bit of a dodgy bloke running around with a neutron probe. No one's ever found it, no. Who was, you know, what is it that's causing these tree dieback? And, you know, finally an ecologist came and said, well, it's actually, you know, a symptom of a landscape that doesn't have enough birds in it, because, you know, they're not suppressing those insect cycles and all that sort of thing. So that was the impetus to try and put more veg back, because you get more birds and then you get that, that benefit out of it. So in terms of monitoring, after the rebirding, the CSRO came and did a little study down here in Holbrook, and I know some people remember the fun going out with the mist nets and catching all the birds. But what that showed us is that investment and that sorry, I can never remember the numbers, can I? You know, that investment actually has a real outcome, and that's what the government was trying to buy that whole time, and now we can prove it. So even in the newest planning, so things that were in 2001, you know, 70% of the woodland birds in that landscape were using that re-veg already back in 2004. And they were also nesting in there, so clearly there was a problem in the landscape, and the birds have really appreciated having that element of the landscape put back. In terms of tree dieback, I mean, it's actually really hard, because it wasn't only the birds, of course. We've got seasonal issues, all that sort of thing. So we're still losing trees, but we're not losing trees at the rates that we were before. And they did some studies around where re-veg included some of those paddock trees, you know, getting about a 6% recovery in canopy in the first couple of years. So the other big, I guess, from the science, and Holbrook Landcare is a very evidence-based organisation, so we're very glad to be able to tell this story, that we have some great partners. So back in 2002, Dr. David Lindenmayer and his crew at ANU put together, you know, a study that would look at the impact of the plantings and the on-farm work on our biodiversity, so that we would have the evidence to be able to say what's going on. Now, you know, because you don't get evidence out of a short-term project. You get some outputs and you can get some benchmarking, but unless you're in it for the long haul, you're really not going to see those benefits. So this is all of their studies, but the Southwest Slope study down in here, you can see there were sites that were set up that were on, you know, farm landscapes that we know. So from here to Burrawa, you know, Peter Herriot had a site, Stonehaven's, you know, got a long-term monitoring site, and they come back and do their bird surveys, mammal surveys, and we're really being able to track, you know, what's happening with our biodiversity, which was one of the points of why we wanted to do all this work in the first place. So that is, that's gold to us, and that's about the only mechanism we have. So what did happen? So have we got more birds? And the answer is yes. In our landscape, we've got lots of evidence. I'm not going to go through all of the findings, but we've got smaller woodland birds are using those plantings on farms. There's lots of interesting data on how they use remnants and re-veg through time, that sort of thing. The 10 lessons are here if anyone wants to have a look. But one of those lessons is that management interventions do work. So we no longer have to justify doing this stuff for biodiversity outcomes. There's a superb parrot. How many people texted me to say the superb parrots were back in the room? Quite a few. And it was so exciting that people are excited about that. The arboreal mammals. So the evidence coming out of that, of course, because they're hollow dwelling, the plantings is something that won't benefit them for many years. But showing the increase in the health of those paddock trees and maintaining the hollows in amongst re-veg. Mason was telling me they're getting evidence of the squirrel gliders using those vegetation corridors in the 4th year. We put some nest boxes in some 20-year-old re-veg out at Mountain Creek only 6 months ago, and there's already chew holes around them. So they're obviously using these. They're starting to use these corridors, which is a really positive thing. Reptiles is a little bit harder because what they've found is all these plantings make very common species much more abundant. So that's a positive thing because it's food for birds and all the benefits that go along with that. And some of our big things are doing really well, like goannas, but we've probably got a bit of a way to go in some of the more rarer species. So isn't that great that we know that and we can start to target and really get the outcomes we're after? We saw a Regent honeyeater in 2011, very important. It's a bit symbolic because they do turn up in some weird spots, but the fact that it was a Geddes who recognised this bird, and they're very special bird people, but the Landcare chair walked out of bed one day and looked up in the tree and there was a Regent honeyeater, and how exciting was that? And there's records of these guys breeding on the common, so over time we hope to see them back again, but of course there's lots of things that are out of our control there. And I just wanted to mention the bustard. So that's another thing that's captured people's imaginations in Holbrook about the biodiversity. Things are coming here, build the habitat, they will come. So we had a bustard the last couple of years actually that are coming around and hanging out in Holbrook. So that's the sort of cool things that I like. But it's symbolic that people care about it and want to tell us about it. So there's lots of challenges obviously coming up, and we've got to maintain the outcomes, and that's in a world that's complicated and changing all the time. The economics of farming is changing, the climate is changing, and nothing will stay the same. So that the job of maintaining vegetation cover for all those benefits is not going to end. It'll be something that we have to constantly do. We've got an agricultural industry, so the roadmap for 2030 is about getting to 100 billion in exports, and I think we're about 45 billion short. So there's a real challenge, but an opportunity for farming too, to say how are we going to get there in a way that is truly sustainable. So maintaining integrity about making sure we're looking after all this biodiversity and keeping the sediment where it's meant to be and keeping our fertiliser where it's meant to be. How are we going to increase productivity on those in-between bits? And that's the thing of Holbrook Landcare today is looking at the research and driving research into that. There's some exciting things going on. It is incredibly exciting time to be in agriculture. Wish I had my time again. So MLA has the carbon neutral target, and we've got the range of, we had a carbon farming project a couple of years ago that did modelling in this region. We acknowledge our privilege. We're in a high rainfall region. We can sequester carbon in trees, in pasture, in soil. And so, some of that modelling is saying if a farm has, about 8% veg cover, you can probably be carbon neutral. And there's a lot of work to go on in more nuanced modelling and trying to get that right. But that is something, and a lot of farms would be you know, at that point and over it in this region. So there's a lot of work to be done there, I think. And it's about the social licence for agriculture, a bit what you talked about, Pete, is, you know, people have just discovered, or there's a whole legion of people that just discovered that meat's dead animals, you know. And I don't know how much we can deal with the extremes at either end, but, you know, there is a whole community and urban population out there that we need to tell these sorts of stories, that we can invest in our landscape, invest in our farmers, and we can get real outcomes for biodiversity and our natural resource management. So that's me. Thank you. Just before, I was going to show this up for Susan, but I just came across these photos. So there's Susan standing with our Green Corps team in 2003 out at Manura, and here she is in 2017 on a Green Army. Not so much a continual policy, but a re-emergence of one every now and again that has been a stalwart for Holbrook. So there you go.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and help you celebrate over, I would say, 30 years of Landcare in Holbrook. And Dale's invited me here today to talk to you about Landcare New South Wales, moving from strength to strength. So I'd like to begin my address by acknowledging the Wiradjuri people, the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. You know, I'm privileged to make this acknowledgement because it continues that ancient custom which symbolises the value Landcare has placed on our relationship with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now, it's very fitting that as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Landcare movement, that we recall it all began in 1989 in Wentworth, where the late former Prime Minister Bob Hawke delivered his speech to launch the national formation of the Landcare movement, an unprecedented union between farmers and environmentalists, and it was to help protect Australian landscapes for future generations. Now, 3 decades later, Landcare has evolved into a national movement. They say there's over 6,000 groups in Australia and hundreds of thousands of volunteers, all playing a central role in sustainable agricultural practices and conservation activities, while also developing and enhancing the community spirit. And I would have said Holbrook would be one of the top, you know, very top examples of what community spirit can achieve. Now, the history of Landcare New South Wales began in June 2007, so about 12 years ago, when a group of volunteers met in the town Myuna Bay on the shores of Lake Macquarie at Newcastle to figure out how to get the New South Wales government to listen to grassroots Landcarers. Because I think in about the mid-2000s, Landcare felt a little bit abandoned. In October of that year, the inaugural muster was held in Tamworth, and the headline on the flyer of that event read, "Landcare finds its voice." Participants at the first muster agreed enthusiastically to form a peak body for Landcare in New South Wales, Landcare New South Wales. Now, there are over 60,000 volunteers in New South Wales who manage and restore our natural environment, improve sustainability of agricultural activities, and build resilience in communities. You know, Landcare in New South Wales is a diverse community. Landcare New South Wales as a peak body sees ourselves as an umbrella for that diverse community. We represent and support over 3,000 community groups, and that very diversity that I'm talking about is our biggest strength and our biggest challenge in working out how we can best support that diversity. Because our goal is to empower Landcarers, and they require capacity to respond in a locally appropriate way for them. We're just not all the same. Holbrook seems agriculturally based, and I come from Tamworth, where I'm involved in urban Landcare. Now, the impact of a supported Landcare is immense, and I think Dale touched on this in his talk. You know, Landcare New South Wales in 2018 did a study in partnership with New South Wales Local Land Services, which estimates the net benefits delivered by a supported Landcare New South Wales community is $500 million a year based on the data available.
Dale mentioned the Oricon infrastructure report that said the economic value of Landcare, that return on investment is for every dollar invested in Landcare activities, there's a return of $6 worth of value. And I think that's really important. Now, that partnership between government and community is the key to our success. What we have learned through our experience is that we're stronger together. As the complex problems we face today of drought, climate change and various others, it means it's more critical than ever that governments partner with grassroots movements like ours. Our flagship program, which we partnered with the New South Wales Government on, our recent $15 million a year, 4-year program, the Local Landcare Coordinator Initiative from 2015 to 2019, and we're going to continue to work with Local Land Services to deliver the current $22.4 million New South Wales Landcare program, which ends in 2023. Landcare New South Wales has also been working on improving engagement between Landcare and Aboriginal organisations and communities. It was raised as a #1 priority at the 2017 muster that we held in Albury, and in recognition of the importance of developing those partnerships and engaging traditional owners in the Landcare movement, an Aboriginal engagement component is now included in that current program, and it'll be rolling out very shortly. Some of you may have met Adrian Zammit, our inaugural CEO. He and his team have begun the process of diversing revenue sources for Landcare across New South Wales. While our partnership with government remains a core element to a sustainable future for Landcare, we've taken the necessary steps to generate new funding sources. Landcare New South Wales' goal is to become a partner of choice for statewide NRM activities. Projects such as the $650,000 Managing Established Pests and Weeds, the $1.37 million Biodiversity Conservation Trust project, and the $480,000 Exchange for Change CDS project are examples of how Landcare is working to highlight the value of our networks in delivering services and opportunities to Landcare communities across New South Wales. Landcare New South Wales is trying to position Landcare in New South Wales as government's partner of choice by leveraging our immense social capital and local knowledge to deliver the government's outcomes. Other partnerships in the pipeline are with the Department of Planning and Industries and Environment, DPI, the Australian Rail and Track Corporation, ARTC, ACMEA, Ozfish Unlimited, Carbon 8 and the Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal. If you have any questions about those new partnerships we're developing, I'm here for dinner tonight, so I'm more than happy to talk to you about any of those things coming up. Landcare New South Wales also provides government support, guidelines, policy templates, advice and support on running effective Landcare groups. We're constantly reviewing and updating those resources, and the toolkits are available on our website. In July 2019, Landcare New South Wales received approval for our DGR status. So that was something that was 5 years in the making. It took us a long time to get that DGR status over the line. So now work is underway to develop processes and procedures that allow Landcare member groups to utilise this service. I noticed Holbrook's already got there, so you're well taken care of. Now, one of the most important things that Landcare New South Wales has done over the last few years is we've developed the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Landcare. Now, the Parliamentary Friends of Landcare provides a forum to ensure Landcare members are heard and represented at a policy level. In 2019, Landcare New South Wales met with parliamentarians more than 30 times. This is New South Wales parliamentarians, to ensure on-ground issues are heard. Our annual Trees in the House event, held at New South Wales Parliament House in Sydney in November, is held each year to spotlight the good work we do and to acknowledge the government's investment in community Landcare. Looking forward, we'll continue to improve our services to members, become more effective at linking grassroots Landcarers to decision makers, and we'll continue the job, and it seems like a big job that never ends, of building systems, processes to diversify revenue sources for Landcare in New South Wales. As you'd all understand, we operate a bit like most of you. We're trying to do our best to do a lot with very little. working in a constantly changing environment and trying to build a membership-based organisation to sustain Landcare in New South Wales on the ground, and also to contribute to the development of Landcare nationally. We've achieved much in the last few years. We've endeavoured to stay connected to our communities and stay true to our core purpose to ensure that land carers have the support they need to care for their environment, their land and their communities. I invite you as members of the Landcare community to get behind us at Landcare New South Wales, your peak body. We only exist to further your objectives, and only by working together will we succeed. I look forward to the discussions this afternoon and to catching up with you over dinner, and I thank you for your time today.
I had a very long presentation. Sam Pincott just told me he's only got 15 minutes, so I've had to shorten it up a bit. So yeah, I'll improvise on the go. Well done to Landcare, 30 years. Yeah, it's amazing since I was a kid growing up in the district how the district's changed, and there's plenty of people in this room that should be proud of that. You know, the question I always look at, is it going to become more important or less important? And I don't think the importance has even started yet. The right to farm, a lot of people don't like meat producers in the world, and there's a lot of people who think we're burning the world up. And I do think the work that's been done previously is probably going to stand Holbrook farmers in pretty good stead moving forward. I'm not going to talk much about sheep. I'm going to talk a lot about the markets, where I see them, and probably open that up to a discussion about some of the opportunities moving forward. We sell rams, 4 different breeds. We sell meat, and we also sell breeding ewes. In summary, our rams create 39 million lamb meals a year around the world. So 650,000 kill lambs from 800,000 lambs. 40% of them go to Coles, 10% to Sydney Retail, 10% to JBS, 10% to Thomas Food and 30% to others. So that's a lot of lamb meals. Whenever we put ewes and rams together, we always think about what is the impact that's going to have on 39 million people. Will they be happy? Will they be sad? And that's the way we look at it internally. I hate this slide, and I think it's the biggest problem with farming, that, you know, thank a farmer. I hate the rhetoric that we're owed a living. We're a business, we've got to earn our right, and I think, you know, the thank a farmer movement is probably harming agriculture, because basically what it means is you can do whatever you've done before and the world's somehow going to provide you a living. Whilst obviously, you know, we've got to be proud of farmers, we're also got to be consumer driven, and we can't put our head in the sand about a number of issues. And I really, you know, every time I speak to a lot of students, speak to a lot of people this year, and that's the first thing I say. You know, we're not owed a living. If we're going to be producers and become meat producers, we've got to really change what we do. And the reason actually this is interesting enough for anyone who was in Landcare, we had a meat profit day. What year was it? 2002, was it, Tim? In Holbrook. And actually we had an Ingham's bloke come and spoke at it, and he actually came and stayed at our house. And I got to know this bloke pretty well over the years, and his name was Ray Treasure. His claim to fame, he developed the chicken nugget. I then tried to give him some figures of how many of them I've eaten in my time. And yeah, I thought he should have got the Nobel Peace Prize. But anyway, it was really interesting. When I explained the farming system, you know, and the way we do things, he actually probably lost sympathy for farmers, because he looked at what we do, and the whole Ingham's business, and I've said this numerous times since that time, the whole Ingham's business was based around 2 price points, $5.99 and $6.99 for a meal for 2. And then they work out the breeds, genes and everything else based on what a consumer's willing to pay. And then I explain how in our industry people show sheep, and they lead them around on a halter and put shampoo in their hair. And, you know, so really everything we do is always consumer focused. The lamb industry's undergone some extremely big changes. Always like the ads to time date it. Anyone know that top ad? Naomi Watts, who was a nobody at the time. Tom Cruise roast. You know, got invited dinner with Tom Cruise and said, no, mum's cooking lamb roast. Back in those days, consumption per capita was in at 20 kilos and it was plummeting big time. People thought lamb was too fatty. It was inconsistent. And then the second ad is remember the dog in the window, trim lamb campaign? And the industry was revolutionised. We made lambs bigger, leaner, and interesting enough, you know, all of a sudden we started to stabilise per capita consumption. And then actually, funny enough, my good friend Sam, who's actually coming to stay with us next Thursday, you know, obviously, and my favourite part was the vegan torching ad. I did ask him whether he's going to torch any next Australian Day, but apparently MLA's really curbed its use of vegans in ads. Apparently it upsets them. So anyway, lamb has undergone a journey. I failed my university assignment in my final year for saying we could produce lambs 30 kilos carcass weight. Unfeasible was the word. Interesting enough, I went to the butcher then. We actually just killed our first 61 kilo lamb this week. So, you know, genetics have changed and the industry's changed a lot. It's an $8 billion industry now. Back when I at university, it was a $500 million industry. It's big business, and it will continue to be a big business. The average American eats 400 grams of lamb a year. That hasn't changed in my whole time at university, but the population's cranked up by 100 million. So, you know, the market wants to eat lamb, and we've had double-digit export growth for the last 3 or 4 years. So it's exciting. We are a global product now. Everyone says, what market do you sell into? Most of our clients don't really sell into one market. Their forequarters go to Japan or the Middle East. Yeah, a lot of the lamb shoulders go into thinly sliced stuff to go in teppanyaki and whatnot. I actually went over there 2 weeks ago and tasted some of that lamb. Coincidentally, the Wallabies were playing in the city at the same time. So Middle East, you know, kebabs, a lot of those kebabs are forequarters lined up. You know, I often like eating them about good hour. I know you quite like them as well, 3 o'clock outside Romano's in the morning. So lamb is a global product. Racks go to America, legs go to France. One lamb, you know, as Roger Fletcher will say, one lamb can go to 82 different countries nowadays. So it is a global product. There's one issue, it's got quite expensive. You know, it's gone from being a staple to now a special events meal, and you can look at that 2 ways. Unfortunately, I always say if you're Betty Blackdown and you've got $200 for the week, you can't go and buy a $60 lamb. Sorry, if you've got $200 for the week to spend for food for a family of 6, you can't blow $60 on a lamb roast. So, you know, we've priced ourselves out of the market, and that's just the reality. If we're happy to go down to $3 a kilo carcass weight, we'd certainly increase domestic consumption. But our target market's changed, and I've actually changed my slides. Our traditional, and I used to always say the housewife, now I say the primary purchaser. That's me at Holbrook stores, very much in control. But lamb's market has changed. It's basically gone from being a staple in the household, the average household eating 24 kilos, now to a young professional market. So really, who's our market? It's actually young professionals around the world. And they're the same in every country. And the interesting thing, a demographer told me the other day, there's more similarity between lamb's customers between countries, so Middle East, America and Australia, than there is between lamb's market and the rest of their country. So that's our market, young professionals. This is a really interesting one, and I'm going to bring this up later on. It's the modern consumer mindset. And I'm an absolute classic. And this is Professor David Hughes' theory, who's a Welsh professor. And he's probably one of the best food people in the world. And this is his, and I just love it. And what it is, we live in the debit credit society. During the week, we accumulate credit points by eating healthy, and on weekends, we spend it. So the way we eat during the week, on Monday, we are a green household. We eat healthy, it's always low fat, and then towards Friday, you might just crack a beer. And that's how we live. And that actually has a big impact because, look at meatless Mondays. 30% of meals in Sydney now are meat-free. And we're seeing that, particularly that sort of early in the week, people are sort of becoming healthy and they're low cost. But what it's showing is a consumer's different on a Monday to a Saturday. And on the same Monday, I'll be hanging out in the fruit section of Holbrook stores, buying lettuce and stuff like that. Come the weekend, I'll be in the beer section and in the frozen pizza section. So it is how society works. It does have a big impact, and also has a big impact on branding. So where does lamb fall down? Interesting enough, I think Phil Ruthen at that same Holbrook Meat Profit Day said that we must follow the wine industry and become branded and tell the story. The beef industry has nailed it since that time. The Wagyu industry is $1 billion industry. The Angus industry in Australia is a $3 billion industry. Lamb in 2019 doesn't have a mainstream brand that has a point of difference on quality. I always love, and Richard Norton, who's head MLA, close friend of mine, he made a good point. Wagyu is now no longer, people that don't eat Wagyu because they like eating it, they actually eat it as a status symbol. It's about what it says about me. It's become an emotional product. No different. I always say when Phoebe goes to a paddock barbie, she'll buy the flash champagne, even though she doesn't know the difference between the cheap stuff. And I think that's interesting. And a perfect example, Mr. Wong in Sydney had a $600 Wagyu steak. What was the biggest issue they faced? They couldn't keep up because every stockbroker wanted to eat the $600 steak. If you charged $100, it wouldn't have worked. And that's the mindset we're in. So lamb really has fallen out of that. The other issue of the lamb industry, would become very good at getting rid of fat, increasing eye muscle, and unfortunately, increasing yield and decreasing fat means marbling goes out of it. So the average lamb in Australia is 4.2% marbling. Consumers find lamb not as good to eat, below 4. The industry is actually dropping. And so we've been on this long-term trajectory. So I always go, there's 2 pictures, both our progeny test lambs. One's a tradie, one's a Dorset. Which one's the best lamb? See, if you asked me in the 80s, that the one on the right would have been our target. Now, we've come full circle now that everyone wants the one on the left. And I think really for us, all we've tried to do is look at the link between eating quality and genetics. Really simple stuff. On the bottom is marbling. On the left-hand side is eating quality score. You increase marbling, you increase consumer overall liking. Interesting enough, I actually take claim to ruining the New Zealand lamb industry, and I actually, I was involved in meat yield, and I was marketing manager for a meat yield technology before I came back to Holbrook. The short and the long of it, no one in Australia took it up. Everyone in Australia and everyone in New Zealand took it up, and in the last 20 years they got rid of all the fat of their lamb. Interesting enough, what do you reckon the average consumption per capita of lamb is in New Zealand? Australia was 20 kilos, now we're 9.5. Under 2 kilos. And I take total credit for that. I've stuffed the industry. And I'm really proud of that. But interesting enough, their average lamb's 2%, Europe's 2%, and the average in Australia is 4.2. So that becomes interesting. The top lambs in the industry, 6.5%. Now, what does that mean? This is willingness to pay. So what they've done is put eating quality as a grade and then willingness to pay. So a 3-star MSA product in Australia is $1. what it shows in different countries, if you increase that eating quality grade to 4 and 5, how much is that willing to pay? So in Japan, for example, for a 5-star MSA product, they're willing to pay 2.8 times more. So it's interesting stuff. So really all we tried to do was test that theory. We did a lot of consumer testing. What we found is we had some really good sheep, we had some really bad sheep. We then also started testing different breeds. We tested some sheep we didn't really own at the time, and then we actually found some breeds had a lot better. One in particularly, the Hampshire Down, which is a rare breed in Australia, was absolutely out of the box. And what it showed is our top Hampshire Down rams off grass could produce a 7% product, which is obviously again that willingness to pay is 5-star MSA. So the other thing, we did the same with their maternal genetics, and basically had the same impact. But this is where it gets interesting. So really what we started doing last year is putting it together. So contracting lambs from high known marbling genetics and putting the right terminal genetics over them. And we did a little trial with Cole Geddes, who was on there before, and there's the outcome. By controlling the maternal genetics and the terminal genetics, we're able to produce a 12% IMF product. Those little puppies are worth about $120 a kilo. So the average lamb's got about, so if you can increase the racks, so the racks are about 3 kilos, if you can increase that by $70 a kilo, that's $210 a lamb carcass. So you can create a lot of value. My tip, there's only about 4% of the population that can afford to buy that, but still there is a market there and they will pay for it. So where we stand at the moment, interesting enough, those same lambs from Coles ended up in Dubai about 3 weeks ago in the highest building in the world. I didn't get to follow them over, but those lambs ended up, in Dubai trial, and we've also done some Chinese trials. So next year these lambs will end up in Dubai and China as well as the domestic market. Now, anyone knows what this movie is? What's the favourite? Show Me the Money. And we have been involved with some of our clients branding on green credentials. So we're involved in one project involved in branding lamb on carbon neutral. And it's a really interesting exercise. The hardest things about consumers, when you ask a consumer, it's interesting, I'll use another one. There's a Tasmanian scientist that spent about 10 years working out. He's trying to increase the omega-3s in lamb. Anyway, spent 10 years and worked out if you fed an $80 ration, you increase the omega-3. But at the end of the day, when you survey the consumers, they all said, we want more omega-3. Are they willing to pay for it? And that's a real challenge, is when you do the willingness to pay data, can you actually get consumers to actually pay a premium? The other thing is, and looking at how it works, the food service market. When you go to a restaurant, when you've had 10 wines, what's more important, a fatty Wagyu steak or a green product? So they're real challenges, of how we look at branding credentials, and I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. To me, it's got to be part of the package. I don't think you can brand a product being carbon neutral, any sort of green certification, if it tastes like rubbish. The two have gone together. And those two are coming together more and more. Coles is a classic, you look at their general direction, sow-free stalls, a lot of those things they're doing are as a brand, as an entire category. And this is an interesting discussion, but it is an issue. I'm open to questions or comments about it.
Tom. I agree that we're not aiming as farmers, but to try to bridge that price gap, get them to pay money. What's your thoughts on that education of where their products are coming from? Is that going to help get them to pay the money?
I think it is on a brand basis. I've just seen time and time again, the issue with the green thing, to me it's a start of the week product, if that makes sense. You know, it's when they're really thinking about green, you know, that Monday morning, you know, when it's trying to, but that's probably where they've overspent their weekend quota by having that extra 10 schooners at the pub, you know, and now trying to cut money. So it's, I mean, I've talked to my friends in Sydney, it's the storytelling's got to be there. It's just trying to extract that money. And I think particularly in your game, Sam, your eggs do taste different, you know. So that's a good thing, free plug. But but it is an issue, you know, if all of a sudden you're putting two steaks side by side, one carbon neutral, the other's not carbon neutral, you know, if they taste exactly the same, that's where, yeah, it's tough. And I think from a branding point of view, you know, that it's not an insurmountable issue, it's just something that people got to be aware of.
What if we've already got a story that, you know, that allows us to brand as green? You know, it's not the price difference that makes the difference, it's the fact that the carbon neutral stickers on that one and not on that one.
Well, I've got a different view. I see, say, Colgetty's. That's the highest IMF lamb that's ever been produced in Australia that the scientists have seen. But there's a lovely backstory that wasn't told as well. You know, it's produced on, you know, place that's been involved in revegetation for a number of years. So to me, you've got to get that quality and you've got to get the back end with it. Like, it's a holistic story. I don't think we can sell low quality beef. You know, you're always going to have the McDonald's and Qantas's and a few of these big companies pushing an agenda. But I'm talking how we, you know, if a beef producer from Holbrook has got green credentials, how can they get paid more for it? And it's a tough gig.
Tom, how you go, Gary? To an extent, I wonder whether it's time we stop focusing on, you know, the green story to get more money. It's the green story to the right plate. And whether it's timber, concrete, cars, vegetables, or whatever, you've got to have those green credentials to have the ticket to play in the world market.
100%. No, totally agree.
The price comes from quality. And I think
Yep.
we segregate those two.
But I do think the two can go together.
They can go together.
Because, you know, there's that, every brand more and more, the more popular you become, the more people are going to assess you for your green credentials. And that doesn't matter whether you're Qantas, and that's starting to change your business practices. So I suppose I raise that just to try and create the conversation. I don't have an answer. I've just been involved with the coalface and involved in numerous meetings where you got people going, this is fantastic, you know, carbon neutral. And you look, the company I work with, Dunkel Pastoral, you know, they're one of the biggest quail breeding programs. I think, Golly, you didn't know much about it, but they're serious players in doing what they've done. You know, they've invested millions and millions of dollars in a lot of areas, but take that to market, and they all want to tell the story, but there's no dollar associated. Now, I know but it is, I suppose, it's trying to work out how you can connect the two.
Tom, Gary, you and I have always seen eye to eye. You took the words right out of my mouth. This requires a long-term strategy. Some of you in the room will know that next year I celebrate 40 years from having established the wine and viticulture industry in Tumbarumba.
Yep.
And yesterday we were recognised as the premium producers of Pinot Noir in New South Wales. And you might say, big deal, what about Mornington, Tasmania? Well, we actually are on the road to positioning ourselves as the top Pinot growers and Chardonnay in Australia. Thanks very much. And it's done on what's called a GI in the wine industry, which is geographically based. I see no reason why Holbrook can't establish a brand and all that goes with it for Holbrook beef and Holbrook lamb.
And we said that called the break, brand Holbrook.
Okay, it feeds into exactly what Kylie said and Gary. It actually starts in your social licence.
Yep.
And I think, in fact, with what we're seeing at the moment amongst the consumers, the price will follow. But it's not about the price to start off with.
100%.
It's actually about establishing a brand and what that stands for.
Yep.
And I think that Holbrook Landcare could actually lead that kind of charge. You already have the membership and the green credentials. It's about putting it together.
No, 100%.
And the money and the quality has to be there even for the brand. It will follow.
No, 100%. But it's just an asset. I put up that to try and create discussion. You know, I don't have the answer, but it is something, you know, and I suppose I'm a economic rationalist that, you know, the opportunity when all of a sudden people can make money from being, you know, more environmentally sustainable, it's going to drive it all.
And just can I add, you know, the average price for grapes and what we get in Tumbarumba for our grapes, the difference is huge. So, you know, it can be done. I totally agree with, you know, I know Phil Riven's work, and if you have a look at what Tasmania has done for its wine industry, it can be done geographically, I believe, for meat industry too.
No, 100%, and that's why I put up there to create conversation.
So brands don't last for very long though, that's the other thing. Like you keep reinventing a story or something every, you know, they've got lifespans.
But it's just something to, it is, sorry. Yeah, I did that to try and create discussion because, as I said, just being involved this year in trying to, and I 100% agree, you actually earn your premium, you don't get your premium off the bat. But I'm just fascinated to watch a lot of that consumer stuff, you know, with household staples. Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, that couple that drinking their lamb, they're also drinking their Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's a top quality product, okay? They go together. I always joke about my lambs. They're already come marinated in Pinot because they've been raising in Pinot.
Tom, excuse me, would it be fair to say that you know, the promotion of lamb is fighting against you in some sense because that's pushing demand, which is pushing price, which is then making it difficult. It will inevitably make it difficult to market against other meats, beef or chicken or pork or whatever. So the question is, say in the pig industry, for example, when demand increases, price goes up. When a pig has 20 piglets a year, they can ramp up the population very quickly and to pursue that profitability, but then the whole thing tips over very quickly. So would it be fair to say that alongside your marketing strategy, I know you're doing it, fertility is a big thing, and feed conversion ratio. How do you balance that?
100% agree. You've got to remember, you know, the New Zealand sheep flock's going down, and our new Prime Minister is going to make that go down even further. The billion tree policy, we're only got one big competitor, that's New Zealand. China's got a heap of sheep, they eat them all. So we've got one big competitor, and black and white cows knocked out half the sheep, which was China driven again with infant milk solids, formula. And the next thing it's doing is, interesting enough, this billion tree policy. So the amount of New Zealand going back to trees because of Jacinda's billion tree policy, that's going to drive it down again. We are lobster. You know, we're not going to increase supply. So I don't think, you know, pigs are really easy to increase, and you know, unless they get a bit crook every now and then, which is good. And that's just interesting enough. Swine flu's driven lamb returns by $35 a head the last 6 months. That's great. You know, the sad reality is it'll probably pop up here. But yeah, I don't think the pig analogy, you know, we are spatchcock on the world market. So, you know, we are high-end food service. The sad reality is that's going to come at a cost of the local consumer. The issue, so the biggest risk for lamb is world economy. And I always love this same dude, Professor David Hughes, he spoke about after the GFC, all the stockbrokers in New York were all organic, and they had all these rules of how they ate. They all lost their jobs. They were, no, normal's fine. And it's interesting, you know, the link between economics and, you know, per capita income and everything else and people's attitude. But he just made that, and I remember that clearly when he said that, because straight away, as soon as they lost their jobs, all their eating philosophy went out the window. They just had to eat whatever they can. So we've probably got to recognise where we are, and that's a premium niche product. And I don't think, you know, we're doing a lot of work on fertility and feed conversion, but that is what we are in the world market. And we're lucky we haven't got many competitors. And, you know, I don't like the Kiwis much. I always go there and speak and tell them that on the airplane as I'm leaving. But no, but it is true, you know. Yeah, we haven't got many competitors.
So that company that's investing in offsets offshore, why aren't they investing in Australia and investing in Landcare?
And that's the thing, well, Sam and I, we had the debate, you know, all of a sudden if you've got a degraded landscape, you can go and buy offsets and have a carbon neutral brand. You know, so I think there's a lot of questions got to be asked in the integrity of these brands, because in my book, you know, it probably demeans the whole system. But do I think from a funding point of view, Landcare, MLA, and we're talking the break, they're going to go for about 3 or 4 more years, and all of a sudden they're going, geez, this 2030 is coming pretty quick, and they're going to be looking for people to hang up. And I reckon, I do think from a funding point of view, you know, there's going to be heaps of money and it's going to get a lot more leading in. And I think if Holbrook can lead that charge, you know, there's going to be a lot of opportunities.
I think what Kylie presented earlier is the basis of that sort of message.
Yep.
To get sharper on, be able to quantify well, and we were going to crunch some numbers and get a tons of carbon equivalent for the amount of work that's being done. We didn't quite land on the right one there, so but we will, and that's the sort of thing that I think we really need to, you know, add to that story as well.
Yeah, so anyway, it's going back to where I think Landcare, you know, will end up. I think there's actually will gain more momentum, because as I said, it's the story's so one-sided. Social media gives one grab, you know, and that statistic influences minds. You know, you can have a look. The beef industry around the world, you know, emits more carbon than America. You know, there's always one little picture, but then you put the backstory to that. So, yeah, it's interesting. There's some really good podcasts on as well. You know, the company that Lamb was in, Victor Churchill, they have some pretty good, you know, talking about eating less, eating better, quality. Yeah, it's interesting. And then you can open the whole fake meat, you know, yeah, highly processed, 27 ingredients. You know, it becomes interesting. It's a good debate. Anyway, probably diverted, but that's, yeah. So that's, I think you've got to have both together. I think you've got to have quality, you've got to have the green on the back end, and welfare as well. Everything we do in our farm now, we always say you've got to act as if you've got to be able to put it on YouTube. And if you can't do something and put it on YouTube, don't do it. Because at some point there'll be a little camera sitting in our yards when I'm kicking the dog, accidentally of course. And that's the way we've got to farm. And I think, you know, the green's probably similar. You know, we've got to be able to, you know, almost be able to put the YouTube credential on your farm, you know, online and be proud of it and be able to get picked apart, because I think that's what our consumer is. But anyway, I think it's exciting. I think there's plenty of opportunities. I think farming is a good business to be in. Yeah, but anyway, well done, Landcare. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeez, that's all right.
I'll be checking that everybody puts on the gates.
That's going to involve a trip to Tamworth as well. So look, that's the end of our presentations for the day. I'm just going to hand over to Sarah, who is going to do a bit of a wrap up for us, and hopefully we'll see most of you later on at dinner. But I'll hand over to Sarah to sum up for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Look, I won't keep people. We've had some fascinating chats. Really looked at 30 years of Landcare, and we now look to the present and to the future. So I want to thank everyone who's involved today. We've had some gems. I'd also like to thank the Landcare staff. We're only as good as our staff. We've got a very good, dedicated staff, and they're coming along this evening, so I hope people can chat to them. As usual, I've just got one little thing that I'm pushing at the moment. I've had a chat to Susan Lee about an awning for the back of the building, and she's very keen, so we'd like to see her here. We're also going to launch, and this is an incentive Hamish Patton, a little project to put some tiles in front of our building, our new lovely building that we own, and not the New South Wales government. And what it'll involve is people, families, individuals buying a tile, and that'll cost between $30 and $40. And as you enter the Landcare office, the tiles will be there. So we'll send out some more information on that. And if anyone would like to just chat to us, any of the staff today or tonight about the tiles, let us know. And the other thing I'd like to do is to thank our partners. We're